Hello and welcome to this discussion in the wire. Clashes between governors and opposition led state governments have become very common over the last few years. Opposition forces have alleged that the governors act more as political representatives of the BJP than as constitutional functionaries. The name of Arif Mohammed Khan, Kerala's governor, has often come up against this backdrop. Among many clashes that he has had with the left-led state government, his campaign to remove vice-chancellors of various state universities have drawn particular attention. Recently, he removed Sanskrit University Vice-Chancellor Professor M.V.Narayanan and Calicut University VC Professor M.K. Jairaj on technical grounds. Khan contended that the appointment processes of vice-chancellors of at least 11 state universities did not comply with the UGC norms. The state government, on the other hand, denies that and argued that the state universities are not governed by the UGC norms particularly. It has also alleged that Khan, by intervening in states' higher education, is attempting to saffronize the universities and colleges of Kerala. Today, we have with us Professor M.V. Narayanan, who was recently removed by the governor from the position of Sanskrit University Vice Chancellor. Both Narayanan and Jairaj moved the High Court. While the court refused to intervene in his matter, it has stayed the removal of Professor Jairaj. We'll speak to him to know what actually went on, what is the real crux of this controversy. Welcome, sir. Thank you for joining this discussion. So,
Thank you very
we'll
much.
begin our discussion to understand for the national audience what exactly is going on in Kerala. And we hear about frequent clashes between the governor Arif Mohammed Khan and the state government, and because of which at least 11 vice chancellors and of state universities are under the scanner of the governor's office. In regarding your case, you had not spent much time as the vice chancellor of Sanskrit University before you were uh, asked to go. And as I understand, the same governor Arif Mohammed Khan had appointed you as the VC. Could you kind of
Yes,
enlighten us
yes.
with what went on?
Actually, the entire problem is represented as one in which the appointments, technically speaking, are contrary to the UGC regulations. Now, one thing to be noted is that there is no accusation, there is no charge that any of these vice chancellors lack in qualifications or experience or eligibility. Almost all of them is completely taken to be and received to be fully qualified people. The only objections to their appointments are that either the selection committee has not been constituted according to the UGC regulations, or in my particular case, that instead of 3 to 5 names that should have been given in accordance with the UGC regulations, only one name was given. In my case, it was because the Sree Sankaracharya University Act specifically says that if there is a unanimous recommendation for one name, the best person, that can be done by the selection committee. So all these removals have been entirely on the basis of pure technicalities in terms of the selection procedure and in terms of the nominations, nothing to do with the qualifications or eligibility of the candidates concerned. So what actually comes up as the fundamental issue here is the UGC regulations themselves. The UGC regulations 7.3, which lays down the conditions by which vice chancellors are to be selected, the constitution of the selection committee, and the way in which recommendations are to be made to the chancellor, they are in conflict with the state acts which have been promulgated by the state legislatures. And because there is an assumption that central legislation, when in conflict with state legislation in matters on the concurrent list, the central legislation shall prevail. In that manner, the UGC regulations is considered to supersede the state legislation or the acts of the respective universities. So the real problem here is a question whether these UGC regulations are actually legal whether, because the UGC Act clearly specifies the province and domain in which the UGC can function. And in Article 26(1) of the UGC Act, it clearly specifies that the areas in which the UGC can actually lay down rules is teaching, research, and examination. Let me repeat that: teaching, research, and examination. What is exempted from the UGC's province or power is a number of other areas like finance, funding, territorial jurisdiction, syllabi and courses, programs, the way in which fees can be charged, and most importantly, governance and administration is not part of the UGC Act. But what has happened is that from 2010 onwards, the UGC has brought in stipulations about the selection of the vice chancellor. Now, who is the vice chancellor? The vice chancellor is not a teacher. The vice chancellor is the topmost officer of the university. He is one of the authorities of the university. In our case, he's a member of the body corporate of the university. And in that way, just as the UGC has not brought in any regulations regarding who the chancellor should be, what is the constitution of the Executive Council or the Senate, or the selection of registrars, controller of examinations, all of which are to do with governance, they have made an exception in the case of vice chancellors alone. And bringing in vice chancellors as part of 7.3 is ultra virus of the UGC Act. Unfortunately, this question has not been properly raised in the courts. Even in the case, the Rajashri case, which is taken as the law of the land right now, this basic question of whether 7.3, which lays down how vice chancellors are to be selected, have not been raised at all in the court. But in the Bombay High Court, some time back, this was raised, and the Bombay High Court clearly observed that UGC Regulation 7.3 is not traceable to the UGC Act at all. In other words, it is ultra virus. It is outside of the province of the UGC. But the net result of this is that these areas, which are under the authority of the state legislatures, that is the respective state legislatures, which make the acts of the university, their powers are being curtailed through these executive subordinate legislations. In other words, by creating the regulation 7.3, the UGC is effectively subverting, infringing into the rights and authority of the state legislatures. And the chancellor here has consistently made use of that 7.3 in order to create problems and to dismiss vice chancellors who are eminently qualified, who are
Yeah.
fully experienced, and who are exceptional people. Dr. Jayaraj, for instance, I don't want to talk about myself, but Dr. Jayaraj is one of the best scientists of the country, internationally rated as one of the best 100 scientists of the world. And this is a person who's being pushed out on the basis of this technicality.
Yes. If I may interrupt you, the whole um, episode of the governor clashing with vice chancellors or trying to kind of exercise control over who can appoint vice chancellor, as because the governor is the chancellor of almost of the state universities, began with the court quashing the appointment of Kerala Technical University, Dr. Rajeshri. So, what were the technical
Yes.
grounds on because of which Professor Rajeshri was removed? And that
In
is
the
what
case of
the
Professor,
governor has been using
yes.
against the vice chancellors of at least 11 state universities.
In the case of Dr. Rajashri, what happened was that the Supreme Court observed clearly that the UGC regulations shall prevail if there is a conflict between the UGC regulations and the state acts, that is, the acts of the respective universities. But as I said earlier, this question of the ultra virus of the UGC regulations was never raised in the Supreme Court at that point of time. In Rajasri's case, there was another little nuance too. The UGC regulations and the State Act were not in contradiction. They basically said the same thing, but in her case, instead of three names, one name was given. But because the Supreme Court clearly said that the UGC regulations shall prevail, the Chancellor of Kerala Universities proceeded to take upon himself the responsibility of the court. He became a judicial authority or assumed the power of a judicial authority and went ahead and said that because this verdict is already there, he is taking action against all the vice chancellors who have not been appointed in accordance with the UGC regulations. Now, there is a real issue here. It is the same chancellor who has issued the notification, the same chancellor who has constituted the selection committee, the same chancellor who has received the recommendations of the selection committee, and the same chancellor who has issued the appointment notice to all of us. Now, if there is an error that has been committed, it has been committed by the chancellor himself.
Himself.
But now, what he goes ahead and does is to actually dismiss everyone under the guise that these appointments are against the regulations of the UGC. And so it is a case in which someone who does the error then goes ahead and in the guise of rectifying the error, acts as a judicial authority. Ultimately speaking, the applicability of a Supreme Court verdict has to be decided by another court of law or the Supreme Court itself. It is not as if anyone, even in an executive authority, can go ahead and decide upon the applicability of a Supreme Court verdict. But that is what has been done in this case.
Okay. But regarding yesterday's High Court decision, the High Court refused to intervene in your matter while
Yes.
staying the appointment of Calicut University Professor Jairaj.
Yes.
So, what was the High Court's argument? Why didn't it intervene in your, especially in your case, the selection committee was one of the contentious issues has been
No, it was
is
in Dr. Jayaraj's case, the selection committee was one of the contentious issues, in the
yes,
sense that the chief
not in your
secretary,
case, yes. Hmm.
not in my case, in Dr.
Hmm.
Jayaraj's case, the chief
Hmm.
secretary was one of the members.
Hmm.
And the consideration was that the chief secretary is not an eminent academic, as the UGC regulations stipulate. But the other side to the issue was that Mr. Tom Joes, or Dr. Tom Joes, who was the chief secretary, is a PhD, has been a part time vice chancellor, has several publications to his name too. So the question was whether, even though he was not serving as an academic, he could be considered as an academic or not. And so that has been taken into consideration, and a stay has been given, and that question will be addressed in the writ petition. In my case, on the contrary, the problem was that one name was given as the only name for appointment by the selection committee. And this was because it was in accordance with the Sree Sankaracharya University Act, which clearly stipulates the first possibility that the selection committee, if they can recommend one name unanimously, that can be done. And if it cannot be done unanimously, then they can give three names out of which the chancellor can make a selection. In our case, in my case, the selection committee unanimously and unequivocally, that is a term that they used, selected me as the best person and nominated my name. And the chancellor accepted that and appointed me in accordance with the State Act. But according to the court yesterday, because it is in contravention of the UGC regulation that 3 to 5 names should be given, the court was not inclined to give a stay order. However, the problem here is this. If I may give an analogy, it is like deciding that a person should be hanged and then later considering if the rule to hang is correct or not. So, without giving a stay order, I have been ousted from my position, but the court in the writ petition is going to consider whether the UGC regulation is ultra virus, whether the chancellor has the jurisdiction to actually come out with this dismissal, and whether subordinate legislation can be considered to be more important than the state legislation. So, all these legal questions still remain, and they will be addressed later on in the writ petition. But as of now, I am pushed out of the job. So
Yeah.
the real legal questions are yet to be considered. That's a
So
contradiction.
how I gather the whole controversy from an outsider's perspective is that there is some kind of internal conflict between the UGC norms and how the state universities have historically kind of run or administered through state acts. So
Exactly.
so effectively, what it is a clash between. It's an issue of federalism. It's an issue of a clash between the center and the state, exactly panning out like various other political debates where center and the state has clashed. How do you kind of see this whole appointments of VC, the controversy within this framework?
I think you've captured the crux of the whole issue here. Now, historically speaking, each university in the states, different states, have their own histories, their own specific locations, not just in territorial fashion, but within the culture and educational system of each state. And the state acts are not all uniform. Each university has a specific act in accordance with the objectives and aims of that particular university. And that has been created by the state legislature through a purely perfect parliamentary process. But what is happening right now is that all of this is being reduced into one uniform system through the agency of the UGC. In other words, if I may make a political analogy here, this is uniform civil code in higher education, in a manner of speaking. One single code, one law, one rule, one system for all universities, irrespective of what their locations are, what their histories are, what kind of work that they are doing. But the result of that is basically the federal structure of the country, where, especially in higher education, there is a certain section or a certain part to be taken care of by the center and other sections to be taken care of by the state. This division or this shared governance is being sabotaged, is being subverted, and state acts and state authority, especially the legislature's authority, is getting subverted and replaced by central power. Now, let us look at it very simply. What is going to happen here? If the UGC regulations are adhered to very strictly, what it means is that all vice chancellor selections in all state universities, it's already the case in central universities, but in all state universities, will become to be completely controlled by the center through the UGC representative and through the agency of the chancellor, because the chancellor is a person who's going to appoint. There is a huge irony here, if I may put it this way. The selection committee, in any real selection, the selection has to be conducted by experts. Now, the expert selection members of the selection committee are expressly forbidden from giving one name. They have to give three names. And who's going to make the final selection? The chancellor. And who's the chancellor? He's a chancellor by virtue of being the governor of the state. According to the constitution, the governor does not need any qualifications. There is no
Yes.
qualifications prescribed. And so, effectively speaking, an unqualified person who has no kind of expertise, either in university education or university governance, will make the final selection. That itself is against natural justice, but it will be vitiated by the interests of the center. It is against federalism. It's a kind of clear centralization, and as what happened in the central universities, this is going to lead to a complete takeover by the forces at the center.
Yeah. So here's I would like to bring, because you've spoken about the chancellor's prerogative to appoint the vice chancellor. There's another side of the political debate where supporters of the BJP or supporters of the governor, they talk about these appointments as also being political. The expert committee, so to say, they say was alleged to have political motivations themselves. What do you have to say about that, especially the presence of chief secretary, who you said that is also a man of great knowledge and has a PhD and can be considered an expert, but optics wise, it as that argument somehow kind of holds how the political was the expert committee politically motivated or could be politically motivated uh, in different circumstances.
That is a doubt that is serious, that can be seriously raised, if whether the chief secretary representing the government can indicate a certain kind of political intervention. But there is also another side to it, which is that the entire money for the state universities are being spent by the state governments. And
Yes.
historically speaking, there are policies of the state government that is being implemented through the universities, policies which are part of whatever government it may be. It doesn't matter which government it is, but there is a kind of connection between the larger policies in higher education that the government is actually pushing forward, and the same kind of thing being done in the universities. So the presence of the chief secretary has been there, historically speaking, as part of the government's investment in the universities. Now, if it leads to unsavory political intervention or political interference, that is something that we should be careful about, no doubt. In my particular case, what is very interesting is that there was no chief secretary there. There were only three. There are three people where one was Professor Varkhedi, the Vice-Chancellor now of the Central Sanskrit University. The second was Professor Rajan Gurukal, a famous historian, nationally
Yes.
reputed historian, who was the Vice Chairperson of the Kerala Higher Education Council. And Professor V.K. Ramachandran was a professor at the Indian Statistical Institute, a famous economist, and the Vice Chairperson of the Kerala Planning Board. So in that case, you cannot actually make any charge of such political considerations at all. They are all eminent academics, very good scholars, brilliant scholars in that sense. So that does not hold water all the time. But then in reverse, may I ask another question? And this may sound to be rather untoward. When you speak of the selection committee having political leanings, what about the chancellor? Why is
Yes.
it that the chancellor is never regarded to be political when almost all the actions that he engages in are through and through political? The constitution, when Ambedkar wrote it, it was clearly envisaged that the chancellors or the governors shall be impartial heads of government, as the president is expected to be. But in reality, what is happening is that most of the governors today, especially in opposition states, are playing games of politics itself. They're not
Yes.
impartial. They're
Yes.
extremely
Exactly.
invested in the whole process. So
Yeah.
the charge can work both ways.
Both
But the
ways.
real problem is that ultimately the power lies with the governor or the chancellor, and that is going to become very, very drastic.
Yes. So, which brings me to kind of another problem which you spoke about also in your last uh, answer was is in situations where we know that the UGC norms or regulations may be overarching on state universities. So we have practically a situation where state universities are funded by state governments, is subsidized by state governments, but the appointment process and the governing rules uh, which are effective on them or which are implemented are framed by the center. So there is some kind of a problem here where, if, for example, if we have schools, primary education is run and administered by state government, and they also make the similar rules. So you spoke about the a problem where a single rule, the uniform civil code, as you said, is problematic for various state universities. So how do we kind of resolve this problem in future, even if there is no political side to it? If in case there is some kind of conflict between UGC norms and state act, so there has to be a way where these conflicts can be resolved harmoniously rather than uh, in conflictually.
See, I think the fundamental principle that needs to be taken into consideration is the autonomy of each university.
Yes.
Now, each university, for example, the work of an institution like the IIT and the work of Sree Sankaracharya University are radically different. They're not the same. They work in different areas, they work in different fashions, the objectives are different. Or if you take another institution like, shall I say, the Dravidian University, their objectives are very different. So each university should be given the opportunity and the space to formulate their own policies, their own objectives. They should be driven primarily by academic interest and academics themselves, with as little or no intervention from the political side other than the actual constructivist politics that is required within academics themselves. For that, what would be best is to actually disassociate this entire system from either the center or the state government and create a structure where academics themselves decide what is to be done. If there is a body within the university, for example, there used to be a case in, I think, Benares in the university quite a few years back, where the vice chancellor would be selected by the people in the academic council of the university. They will invite or they will nominate someone from within or without who is an eminent academic to become the vice chancellor. So, in that sense, it will be a decision taken from within the university. But what is being done right now is all such autonomy is entirely being sabotaged, and everything is taking a very centralized system. So, if you ask me, for example, the Shyam Menon Commission, the higher education report given recently to the government of Kerala, headed by Professor Shyam Menon, and I was a member of that. What we suggested in that was that the university itself should have a set of board of governors who will be eminent academics from different disciplines and who have national or international repute, who will together decide in terms of the requirements of the university who the vice chancellor and who the pro vice chancellor should be, in which case the decisions will be clearly addressed at the requirements of the university. Now, even there, you can have accusations of politics. That is always there. It's not as if you can keep politics out. It is not keeping politics out, but keeping sectarian politics out. You need to have political perspectives in academics and intellectual life. That is absolutely necessary. But it should not be, shall I say, brought down to sectarian or party politics. But beyond that, in terms of the politics of intellectual life, that should be there.
That should be there. So my last two questions, sir. First is what will be, since now you have been ousted from your position and the High Court has intervened in your matter, what will be your future course of action? Because
We are moving the division bench today itself for an interim order. I intend to fight this till the end. Not for myself. It is not because M.V.Narayanan wants to continue as a vice chancellor. In fact, I'll be much more relieved to go back to my academics life, reading and writing and that kind of thing, and teaching, which is much more enjoyable than administration. It's not for the sake of M.V. Narayanan, but it is to actually, bring to the fore an issue that is of extreme importance, especially when, at a time, higher education has become very crucial. And so I shall be taking this case up to the highest court, irrespective of whether I win or lose. I'm not bothered about that. I shall continue the fight because I'm afraid, seriously afraid, that for fascism, higher education is a major matter, and higher education will become crucial, and we need to fight this. Because when knowledge production and intellectual life is actually, shall I say, curtailed, or it's being used for ideological purposes, as we have seen in many other countries before, that will be a sad day for a nation. And I, as a teacher, it's my responsibility to myself and my 30 or 35 years of experience as a teacher to fight it as much as I can. That's all I can say.
oh, and since you brought this up, so you have had an academic career over 30 years where you taught in Calicut University and you've seen various state governments and governments at the center. have you ever in your 3 decade long career ever kind of within the existing framework, whatever within with all its discrepancies, with all its limitations, did you ever kind of see this kind of a clash between the center and the state in as far as academic matters or as far as university matters were concerned? Never.
Joy, let me put this way. I've taught in India. I've taught in several other countries. I've taught in Japan. I've taught in Britain, in the United Arab Emirates. I've been on the boards of several international universities in Australia, in Singapore, several places. There are always problems in terms of power sharing. That's there, and in questions of autonomy. And there are always debates about that. But those debates continue, and there is a debate, and then somehow or other you resolve that and go forward. But this is something that I've not seen before. And I would say that higher education is not an exception. What we see is an overarching control of every aspect of citizen life in this country, starting from, if you look at higher education, starting from what text to teach, what syllabi to teach, what courses should be taught, then what appointments should be made, what programs should be introduced, from the lowest level, or the most shall I say nuanced level of academics, to the highest level of vice chancellor appointment. This is a very centralized takeover that is taking place. I've never seen this before. There have been various governments. There have been the Congress, there have been the Janata Party. All these governments have come and gone in the center. We have had different governments, Congress and the left, repeatedly here in the state. But this is a new kind of fight. This is a new kind of conflict. And that conflict is primarily because it is an attempt of the right wing to take over the higher education. And this is something that we have seen elsewhere. Let me just say, this is something that we have seen in Germany and Italy before. And that is being repeated here, verbatim almost down to the letter. If you read a book like Erika Mann's School for Barbarians, where university education is systematically taken over by the Nazi Party, what we find here is something extremely similar, down to a T. That is what is happening here. We've already seen that in central universities. Now it's a national agenda, the same national agenda being implemented in state universities too. And that is a real tragedy of the situation.
Thank you so much, sir. As you pointed out, these are ominous signs for the Indian education system. And let me tell you that this, what you have gone through, what other vice chancellors or what other academics are going through in Kerala is just not a Kerala specific case. The similar patterns are being seen in almost every state where, and even in central universities where the central government is trying to take over appointments and down to the T, where they are trying to dictate each and every aspect of university life. So let us see how this pans out in the future, and we'll keep tracking this in the wire. But thank you so much for joining us. It was lovely discussing the nuances of what is going on in Kerala universities and the clash between the governor and Kerala universities. Thank you so much. Thank you for
Thank
joining
you.
us.
Thank you for giving me the time. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Yeah.